October 1944. A cold wind swept through the docks of New York Harbor, carrying the salty tang of the Atlantic. From the shadows of the transport ship, a group of German prisoners of war stepped onto American soil for the first time. They had crossed oceans in defeat, their minds crowded with rumors of cruelty, starvation, and endless labor. But the world that greeted them was something neither they nor their commanders could have imagined. Captain Wilhelm Hartmann, once a decorated officer of the 17th Panzer Division, clutched the wooden railing of the gangplank. His uniform was worn, the fabric faded from sun and sea spray, his boots caked with months of mud. Around him, 50 other soldiers shuffled forward, faces pale and eyes wide, each step carrying the weight of a war that had devoured their continent. The first thing they noticed was silence, not the tense hush of a battlefield, nor the whispers of captured towns. They expected commands shouted over rifle muzzles, the bark of orders, the crack of discipline. Instead, the pier echoed with the mundane sounds of a working port, seagulls, tugboats, the distant call of vendors selling lunch to dock workers. It was the sound of a world continuing, indifferent to the war that had consumed Europe. Hartmann's eyes flicked over the scene. Soldiers in crisp khaki uniforms moved with quiet precision, not cruelty. Trucks rumbled past, loaded with crates stamped Red Cross, humanitarian aid. A dock worker offered a friendly nod to a group of prisoners, gesturing them to the trucks without a hint of fear or malice. Hartmann's hand trembled slightly, gripping the photo of his wife that he had kept tucked inside his jacket since capture. For weeks he had imagined horrors at every corner. Now he could scarcely believe what he saw. The convoy moved slowly toward Camp Shanks, the main staging area for POWs arriving from Europe. Dust swirled beneath the tires of army trucks, carrying the strange scent of autumn leaves and diesel, a far cry from the smoke and rubble they had left behind in Cologne and Aachen. Inside the canvas-covered truck beds, men shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered prayers. Others stared silently at the horizon, attempting to reconcile the rumors of American brutality with the calm, organized world unfolding before them. Hartmann, seated near the tailgate, counted seconds in his mind, each one a small rebellion against disbelief. He remembered reading reports that the Americans would strip the prisoners of dignity, feed them only enough to survive, and treat them as less than human. Yet here, the air smelled not of gunpowder and fear, but of ordinary life, laughter from unseen workers, the creak of crate-laden trolleys, the distant bark of a dog. When the trucks finally stopped within the camp perimeter, the prisoners braced for chaos. Guards with rifles would bark orders, dogs might circle, and the very ground would demand obedience. Instead, a young American sergeant stepped forward, his khaki shirt damp with sweat, and spoke calmly. "Step down, gentlemen. Welcome to America." The words froze Hartmann. Welcome. Not commands, not insults, not suspicion. Welcome. He exchanged incredulous glances with the men around him. Slowly, almost mechanically, they obeyed. Hartmann's boots sank into red clay unlike any soil he had known, alien against the gray of his uniform. Around him, the camp unfolded like a vision, neat rows of wooden huts, white tarpaulin roofs catching the sun, a water tower gleaming above it all like a silent sentinel. American flags fluttered lazily, indifferent to the war raging oceans away. As names were recorded and the prisoners prepared for their first meal, the air filled with the scent of bread and beef stew. Cooks moved swiftly, barrels releasing warm steam scented with herbs. A corporal called out, "Lunch for transport detail and guests. Don't let it spoil." Guests, Hartmann repeated the word in his mind, incredulous. Could it be true? Could a country that had been painted as merciless now treat him and his men with basic decency? A cold cup of water was offered, and Hartmann hesitated. Thirst overcame suspicion. The first sip sent a sharp, impossible clarity through him. Around him, whispers in German filled the air. Shock turned to laughter, awkward and hesitant, breaking through years of fear and expectation. In that moment, the rigid certainty of propaganda, the endless expectation of cruelty, began to crack. The Texas wind, or was it New York, carried a scent of ordinary life, a sound of civility that the men had forgotten existed. Somewhere, a harmonica played a clumsy, heartfelt tune. Hartman's mind wavered between disbelief and awe. They had arrived expecting punishment, yet found instead a strange, bewildering dignity. Camp Shanks sprawled across the rolling New York countryside, a grid of orderly barracks, fenced perimeters, and neatly raked parade grounds. Inside, the prisoners discovered a rhythm they could scarcely recognize: bugle calls at dawn, measured drills, and meals served on polished trays. Hartman watched, still skeptical, as Americans moved through their routines with precision but without aggression. Every detail, from the allocation of beds to the timing of bread deliveries, whispered of discipline and of respect. Breakfast arrived in steaming trays: scrambled eggs, thick slices of bread, and coffee black as iron yet fragrant. Hartman noticed immediately that each prisoner's portion mirrored that of the guards. The equality, so simple yet profound, unsettled him. In Europe, rank dictated everything, even the right to eat before others, to sleep under warmth while comrades shivered. Here, there was order, yes, but no hierarchy of cruelty. Even the Red Cross parcels, chocolate and letters carefully packed from home, were distributed with ceremony. Hartman's men were assigned light work details: repairing fences, tending vegetable gardens, and assisting in the camp's small bakery. The Americans supervising them were surprisingly relaxed, often joking, teasing each other, yet never condescending. On his first morning outside the wire, Hartman met a farmer who had come to oversee the camp's crops. The man was young, lean, and freckled, wearing overalls bleached by sun. "Morning, fellas," he said, with a grin that needed no translator. "Don't overwork yourselves. Help where you can, and drink plenty of water." The gesture left the prisoners stunned. They had expected suspicion, hostility, maybe even hidden traps. Instead, they were offered lemonade from a glass pitcher, the cold sweetness shocking after months of rationed, tepid water. One by one, they drank, and laughter, a sound nearly foreign after years of marching, bombings, and fear, broke through the group. Hartman, usually reserved and disciplined to the point of rigidity, felt a strange loosening of his tension. Days passed, and the camp's patterns became a revelation. There was sports, even music. A small choir formed under the guidance of a chaplain, singing Schubert and folk songs. Guards played poker with chocolate ration tokens, and ordinary conversations flowed freely between captors and captives. Letters sent home, heavily censored, nevertheless carried the unmistakable truth: the prisoners were fed, clothed, and treated with a civility they believed impossible. Hartman reflected on the moral inversion that enveloped Camp Shanks. Here, men who had been enemies were being educated in humanity, not through speeches, not through propaganda, but through routine decency. Civilization, he realized, measured itself not in victory, but in restraint. Every day brought a lesson more subtle than any battlefield command: dignity could survive defeat. Suspicion lingered at first, but slowly even the hardest-hearted officers began to trust that this strange kindness was consistent, deliberate, and real. One afternoon, a baseball game was arranged between prisoners and guards. Hartman, once a tank commander, pitched with a surprising accuracy, striking out a young corporal whose grin mirrored the prisoner's own delight. Laughter erupted across the fields, a bridge between two worlds that had only met in fire and fury months before. The war felt impossibly distant here, the only struggle the pursuit of simple joy in a summer afternoon. By the end of the week, even the most skeptical prisoners acknowledged it quietly. America had not come to humiliate them. The country they had feared, a continent away, had chosen a different path. Hartman wrote in his journal that night, "We expected punishment, yet found order. We expected cruelty, yet found decency. Perhaps the greatest weapon here is not the rifle, but the restraint to treat an enemy as a man." Weeks turned into months, and Camp Shanks settled into a rhythm that blurred the lines between captor and captive. Hartman watched as men who had expected cruelty began to laugh, argue, and even compete with the Americans in ways that would have seemed impossible back in Europe. The camp's routines, the bugle calls, the orderly lines, and the shared meals were no longer strange. They were life. Religious services became a revelation. A Lutheran minister from nearby New York offered sermons in German, speaking not of victory or defeat, but of forgiveness, compassion, and the fragile beauty of life. Prisoners listened, some with tears they had thought impossible, feeling emotions untainted by ideology for the first time in years. Hartman, standing at the back of the wooden pews, felt the tight coil of fear and suspicion loosen in his chest. The American guards, barely older than some of the prisoners, displayed patience and kindness in ways Hartman had never encountered. They helped carry supplies, offered advice on work, and occasionally shared stories of home, of families waiting, of ordinary worries. Even minor acts, offering an extra piece of bread, lending a book, or fixing a broken shoe, became symbols of a civility Hartman had believed lost in the world. Sports and leisure became a bridge between two cultures once defined by conflict. Baseball games, soccer matches, and impromptu card tournaments replaced gunfire with laughter. One August afternoon, Hartman pitched for his makeshift team, striking out an American corporal who cheered in delight. In that moment, the barrier of ideology, the rigid divisions of war, seemed to vanish. Enemies were discovering one another not through force, but through decency, shared effort, and simple human connection. Letters from home contrasted sharply with the calm of camp life. Families, amazed at the treatment their sons received, sent words of gratitude and concern. "We are treated well, we are fed, we are allowed to write freely." These letters reinforced what Hartman and his men were learning daily. Fear and cruelty were not universal, and dignity could endure even after total defeat. By late 1944, Hartman understood something that would stay with him for life. Civilization was measured not by conquest, but by conduct. Within the fences of Camp Shanks, in the shadow of a world at war, mercy and restraint had quietly reclaimed what ideology had destroyed. When the time came for repatriation, Hartman and his men left not with resentment, but with letters, gifts, and memories of lemonade on a hot field, laughter in the barracks, and evenings filled with music under a sky that seemed impossibly wide and calm. The journey home across the Atlantic was quieter, reflective. Hartman gazed at the receding horizon and thought of America not as a conqueror, but as a teacher. He wrote to Colonel Denton, the camp's commanding officer, "We expected revenge and found respect. You taught us the architecture of humanity better than any battle could." Camp Shanks, like many POW camps across the United States, faded with time, its barracks emptied, fences rusted, fields reclaimed by nature. Yet the story endured. In the hearts of those who had walked its grounds, both prisoner and guard, lingered a singular lesson. Even in the shadow of war, dignity, decency, and human kindness can survive. And sometimes the greatest victory is not the defeat of an enemy, but the choice to treat them as a man.